The sweet Lord only knows why I have not got this guy on the podcast years ago. But here he is. He's Tom Stickney, who is giving us some time from his precious time off down in the Keys. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. It's so much fun. You can see my background is all key, it's all got the keys in. I wish that was my room, but unfortunately I've got a beautiful view of the parking lot because I'm spending all my money on scuba diving, not the room.
You're
But
looking
the
all relaxed.
background,
You're looking all relaxed and tan. So thank you. And let me get me out of your hair. And for the folks who are watching on YouTube, you'll see that that's a very bad joke because Tom has got a very cool, shiny, bald head. All right, Tom, let's start here because you're an expert, biomechanical expert. You've been, one of the top teachers in the land and in the world, in my opinion. Um, but I've had this cool interaction with you where it's occurred to me that despite everything that you've researched and what you teach and stuff, you've got this old school bent to you. And it gets
exactly.
me to thinking to this. I've long believed, and I'm 54 years young, I've long believed that there's nothing really new under the sun. And we live in this age of golf information and technology. But the reality is, there's nothing really new under the sun. Am I right?
Exactly right. The greatest thing about golf is it's a continued regurgitation of these feels and of these thoughts. And as science comes in, they prove that a lot of these old guys had some pretty good thoughts to them. Now, we didn't have all the technology to put it all together,
Mhm.
but it's pretty doggone amazing when you start to look back at some of the things that we'll talk about here. Um, you know. Uh, how they had such insight. And one of the greatest things to me is when you look back at The Search for the Perfect Swing by Cochran and Stiles, or you look at The Golfing Machine by Homer Kelly.
Mhm.
I mean, these were written years and years and years prior to really good video analysis. I mean, there's no such thing as force plates. There's no such thing as 3D motion analysis. I mean, these guys dug it out of their brains and what they saw, and it's just amazing to me as a techie. I look at it and I go, "Oh my God, how in the world did they come up with that?" I mean, thank the good Lord that they figured that out. And then all of a sudden, I start to think about, what would it be in today's time, or where are we going to be in 10 years now that we know what's going on with these old school fields to create these new school golf swings. And I think that's what it is. There's still guys like me out there that are using a little bit of mixture of the old and the new, and I kind of like it. I'm 54 as well, so I'm still rooted in the thing. When I first started, it was stand on the lesson tee and just watch ball flight, and then it kind of merged into video and all the rest of it. And now it's AI and it's coaching you. So life is pretty good. It's been a great time to be in the golf instructional industry.
Yes, I'm smiling for the audio folks if you're not on YouTube, because what Tom says there. Look, ever since I started teaching golf in 1996, something maybe I was gripped by a fit of liberation and intellect, where I was like, from when the very first shepherd struck a pebble over in Scotland somewhere, and then they started hitting featheries and such with wooden sticks to when George Jetson swings a golf club in 2021, 22, whatever it is. Their
Right.
interaction between ball and club remains the same. And
Exactly.
and, and honestly, I think sometimes not only do we overcomplicate things, but the mistake a lot of people make, and this is why I want your comment because you're the expert. Sometimes they misinterpret the information, or sometimes they don't look at all the information and they get fixated on like one data point. Am I crazy with that?
A million percent. And that's the one thing that is the danger of the social media side of the golf instruction is, if your MO is wanting to learn how to shower the club, I mean, there's so much information on just how to shower the club. There's so much information on, what pivot post you should use. There's so much information on any particular topic you can come up with. And it still goes back, like we said, to some of these old school feels. But now where we've got AI, with Sports Box and things like motion to coach and things like that that actually put data on these particular motions. But you know what? Like McLean said in the X Factor, you've got to have a certain hip turn, you got to have a certain shoulder turn. There's a separation between the two, and that's was proven a long time ago, and it's now all of a sudden we can look at it, we can measure it. So it's
And
pretty neat. But you
people are
just have
like,
to be.
Yeah,
You
now
just have to be
people are
real
like that
careful.
Jim McLean's a smart dude. Yeah, anyway,
Oh, he's unbelievable. He and Mike McTeague came up with that in 1992, and it was a pretty interesting thing. And so, I think that as time goes on, we will continue to weed out a lot of the information that needs a little bit of refinement. But we're also going to find out that, you know what, there's a lot of stuff that was written a long time ago that was really, really good.
yeah. Okay, before we get into that, I'd be remiss if I don't introduce you properly because we have a global audience. Tom, so please, for our tribe around the world, tell us a little bit about you.
A little bit about me. I'm was Golf Magazine Top 100 instructor for 15 years. Moved off to Mexico and got one of the top international teacher awards from Golf Digest. And now I've moved back to the States here and down in Jupiter, Florida at Jonathan's Landing Club. And so back in the States full time and ready to tackle the world once again. And so I've been fortunate to be all over the place teaching golf, and but for the most part, I've just dealt with the country club player and really focusing on that. I've taught some guys on tour, some girls on tour, but my calling is definitely dealing with the country club clientele. I just love the struggle that they have, and the carrots of you give them this one little carrot of information, all of a sudden, man, it's like you gave them a gold bar, and so for me that just is so much more fun. You get so much more of that with the country club golfers, whereas the tour players are, it takes a long time to implement a change, and you might see a quarter shot, an eighth of a shot, or something like that. So that's kind of where I've been and what I've done.
You're being awfully humble, folks. His list of achievements is about as long as all the research he's done on the golf swing. All right, let's get to it. Let's go old school, or let's
Old
apply
school.
old school to new school golf swings. You've sent me a list, and I'm going to sort of cherry pick some of them and allow you to elaborate. Now, you've talked about the X Factor already and Jim McLean, and he's been on the show. And I want you to tee this off because, first off, he's admitted that the X Factor was sort of misunderstood.
100%.
So,
100%.
so describe for our viewer slash listener what the X factor is, why it's still applicable, and the elements to it, and how it can make golf swings not just more powerful, but certainly more reliable.
Well, in golf, you have to have certain things to control the body. You have to have pivot control. You have to have geometry control. And
Mm-hmm.
so all of a sudden, when you start talking about the pivot, which is how you twist and turn and displace weight, that's where the X factor comes in. And the X factor is nothing more than the difference in turn between your shoulders and your hips at the top of your backswing. Well, actually, at any point in your golf swing, but just simply stated, if I stand up and I twist my shoulders like this, I can only turn my shoulders a certain amount before my hips start to turn. And that's that flexibility. Everybody's flexibility is a little bit different, and that's your X factor. So let's say that I can turn my shoulders 30 degrees and then my hips start to move. So now all of a sudden the hips are at 1 degree and my shoulders are at 30. So all of a sudden there's a 29-degree gap between the
Yeah.
two. So all of a sudden that is what the X factor is, that the difference in that gap. And what Mr. McLean had talked about was the differential at the top between where the hips were and where the shoulders were. So let's talk about this in very simple forms,
All right.
very simple numbers. So if we say that the hips turn 50 degrees, okay, and the shoulders turn 100, there's a 50-degree differential between those two numbers. Now,
Mhm.
obviously, we have to have some sort of rotation, and we have to have some sort of winding up or torquing up of the body. What happened to Jim and Mike McTeague when they came up with this X factor is people often thought that, okay, I need to restrict the hips as much as I can, to turn against that as much as I can, to tighten that up as much as I can. And all of a sudden, it got people very bound up. And I've always said in a lesson to you, I want stability, not immobilization. And
Yeah.
I think what happened to the X Factor was people got immobilized. They said, well, if I can have a 50-degree differential in that example I just gave, well, maybe I can stretch it to 60. Maybe I can stretch it to 70. and all of a sudden, before you know it, you've got a bunch of people trying to put themselves in physiological positions that they just can't do. And so I think what happened is when TPI came along with their physiological testing, when ProScreen came by with their physiological testing, and we're using AI so they can actually measure these data points. I think we started to realize that yes, there is an X factor. Everybody has a certain differential, but not everybody can push it to the degree that what we were trying to push it back in the early 90s when it was first created. And I think that's where the big disconnect was.
Then I'm assuming, because you work with golfers of all skill stations, that if a person is immobile or not as flexible, look, it's one thing to get flexible, but everyone has our limitations, that you're not averse to some golfer allowing their lead heel to lift up off the ground as they try and, get a little bit bigger a stretch on the way back. Am I correct in my assumption?
100%. I mean, at some point, you've got to allow, the X factor can work in the opposite way. I see this a lot. I see my older clientele comes in, they don't have a very big hip turn because they've been so cognizant of staying still,
Yeah.
and not turning a whole bunch, whether it's been misunderstood or whether it's just physiologically easier just to stand up here and use their arms. But all of a sudden, if let's say we'll use that 50 degree differential example again, if the hips are only turning 30, well, 50, 60, 70, 80 go to the shoulders. So if I can get the hips to turn 50, all of a sudden now I get the shoulders turn 100 and I can keep the club in the air a little bit longer. And as we all know, keeping the club in the air longer for the older clientele is what's going to produce more time for them to create more club head speed. When you're younger and you can create a higher X factor through and some better ground reaction forces and do different things, which we'll talk about later on, you might be able to get away with some of these things, but the older clientele, I tell it, lift up the left heel, turn the hips as much as you can, get that thing back there as much as you can. I mean, I really like Chambly's book, what he wrote, and Brandel talked about allowing the left heel to rise and allowing, going back to more of a old school type of golf swing,
Mhm.
and I think there was some merit to that. I think everybody kind of got a little confused on the X factor, even though Jim in his books and Mike in his articles kind of didn't didn't explain it in that way, but it just kind of pushed in that
Yeah.
direction.
Well, I mean, it's so hard to. That's why I'm so big on understanding on the show because I misunderstood the thing as well when I first looked at it.
I
And
think we all did.
I got my feet glued to the ground, and so as a result, I gave up some speed. And now
No question.
golfers are realizing they can open the thing up. Let's turn the X factor into the downswing because Jim mentioned to me, he goes, let's say the X factor is 10 at the top. On the downswing, I want to try and get it to 11, 12, where the low body just leads the unwinding. And I've had a lot of success, I'm sure you have, where I've said to golfers, hey, try and keep your back looking at the target for a little while longer in transition. You'll be
And
astounded how that happens, helps swing path and the acceleration of the club.
exactly. And as we go back, as we continue on, when we start to look at like old school feels, keeping the back to the target a little bit longer, driving the legs as we would talk about in the 70s. And all of a sudden, what that would do is the legs would start, the upper body would lag behind, club would transition to the inside, a la the inside move
Yeah.
for Peter Costas. And all of a sudden we start to have that whipping effect of the club coming through. And so what happens is if we can get that feeling of as the club is moving back, the lower body is moving forward, whether it's driving the legs, whether it's the rotary motion, or whether it's replanting the left heel a la Jack Nicklaus, which in my opinion was one of the greatest
Right.
tips, which I do want to cover here in a second, which is one of the greatest, most all-inclusive tips on with ground force reactions. You're starting to increase that X factor stretch, so to speak. The upper body is still going back, but the lower body is going down while the upper body is going back, kind of like that baseball pitcher. He's starting his lower body's moving forward long before the arm comes through, and that's that kind of whiplash effect creates a lot of speed. And
You know what? I'm watching you, and for the folks, you should get on YouTube and watch Tom because he's doing a beautiful, simple, almost illustration of the movement. And I'm looking at this going, doing this properly, there are so many swing hills. Like if someone's listening to this and they're a huge heave with a trail shoulder and they're coming over the top and hitting these choppy pull fade shots, you get this X factor move starting the downswing, you're going to straighten off your golf swing very, very quickly.
A million percent. And that goes into, like we talked about, you get that X factor stretch. The X factor all of a sudden starts to become a little bit more tighter on the downswing. And then all of a sudden that right, we go back to old school feel since that's kind of the topic of our thing. And think about Harvey Penick talking about
The right
reattaching
elbow.
the right elbow to the right side or driving the right elbow, so all of a sudden these were reactions of using the pivot correctly. Homer talks about in the golfing machine, talks about, the pivot controlling 90% of the golf swing. And then you had, Jimmy Ballard come out and David Ledbetter came out and talked a lot about connection, about how these things should work and how the body does a lot of the work and the arms and the club tend to follow and they should do the right things, so to speak. There's certainly a substantial amount of that in instruction today.
I'm
And
amazed.
those
I'm
guys are
amazed.
brilliant.
Yeah, I'm amazed as you're going here because we're essentially kissing every one of these fields, yeah, in one conversation, just by opening up with the X factor. You've talked about Penick. It's from the Little Red Book. It's over here on my desk. And the right or the trail elbow. Let's use
Yep.
modern vernacular, right? Because there's
Yes, yes, yes.
left-handers too. Where the trail elbow from the top gets down to the trail side. Now, you did talk about Jimmy Ballard and connection, but I'm going to go to that next. So Penick's like, he called it the magic move, if memory serves me.
Yes,
He
it's
goes
correct.
from the top as the trail elbow returns to the trail side, or the right elbow gets down to the right side. Um, it happens in every sport, but so many people misunderstand this. Like they'll hear us and go, okay, I get to the top, I'm going to suck my elbow into my side, then I'm stuck and I don't hit the ball properly.
Exactly,
At
exactly.
least, at least help us do this properly, Tom.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I don't know whom I'm getting ready to plagiarize this from. So whomever it
Don't worry.
was, thank you very much because I use this all the time in my instruction and I cannot remember off the top of my head where I heard it first. But anyway, under your trail side and under your lead side, there's a seam on your shirt
Yeah.
where the two patterns come together. So all of a sudden now we want that rear elbow to dive in front of that seam, stay on the front portion of your body. We don't want the right elbow to suck down behind that seam of your shirt, get jammed in and pinned in behind your trail hip, because when that happens, all of a sudden, like you said, you get stuck, you get jammed, the club goes flinging out into right field. You can hit blocks, you can hit big swinging hooks, and you can, yeah.
I'm pointing at
That's
myself.
that's why I fade it. I figured I know it's going left. I know it's going left to right, so we're in good shape. But those are the moves that I think when we start talking about the arms, and you see a lot of this on the internet today about how the arms are working as far as what they're trying to do, where we're trying to get the trail elbow, and we're trying to get it pitched in front of the rear hip as best we can, so we can get that club in a lagging condition and all of a sudden now we can use the pivot to unleash that
Mhm.
power, that centrifugal force, as you will, to get that club to go ahead and swing out into right field. And once again, as we go back into it, when you do have the right motion transitionally, that X factor stretch coming down, hopefully we'll get some external rotation of the right shoulder, of the rear shoulder, and that drives the right hip in front of the right shoulder in front of the right hip, and the right elbow in front of the right hip, and all of a sudden now we're in the right position to go ahead and knock the stew out of it. I mean, I want you to hit as far as you can.
Yeah, amen. Okay, this walks it almost walks a very tight line with connection, a Jimmy Ballard theory. And Ballard had his time in the sun. I mean, Curtis Strange made him look like he was a genius because
Yes.
Strange would drive the thing up a Nat's rear end. He was that accurate. Um, but again, just like the right elbow thing, so many golfers misunderstood it. And I was one. I'm a led better disciple. He's like a mentor to me, and I would get my arms so pinned to my sides. I never really had the freedom. There wasn't this like freeing up element to my golf swing, and so I'd hit the thing straight, but not very far.
Right.
So help us reconcile connection first off, because next thing I see people like they're all stuck and there's no real freedom or athleticism to their golf swings.
Right. And I think that, we go back to the head cover under the arms drill. We go
Yeah,
by the
totally.
talon across the chest or in under the arms. And I think that's where people got a little bit disconnected or misunderstood this thing, because all of a sudden now we have our arms, our armpits are jammed against our sides. We can only make swings up to about shoulder high, and our arms are pinned to our body. And yes, that's a great way to feel connection where the sternum, zipper, and the hands are all working in unison together. Wonderful way to hit some short little wedge shots. But yes, the arms have to lift off the body to some
Yeah.
degree. And I think if you had Mr. Ballard on here, I think he would tell you, yeah, they do come off a little bit to some degree, but they don't have to be pinned down and really glued down. And I think when we start looking at golf, like I said before, stability versus immobilization. I mean, I think Jimmy was saying, hey, look, let's keep the arms reasonably attached to the body and let's let the body react to the arms. I
Hmm.
mean, just let the body
Yeah.
drive the arms rather. But I don't think he was saying, hey, look, I don't want to ever see your armpits, wherever you're going,
True.
you know. And I think that, yes, there's varying degrees of that. But the bottom line is when you have some sort of connection, some sort of integration where the body and the arms and the club are all working in unison together, led and powered by whatever you want to lead and power them with, I think you have a good transition, you're going to have a good impact position, and you're going to have a good golf swing with some power.
How about you comment on this statement I'm about to make, where, because I made the mistake until I was corrected by Ledbetter himself, because I read the Ballard book and as a youngster, I read the Ledbetter stuff. And I was a guy trying to hit drivers with head covers under my arms or a towel across my chest, which was wrong. And Led told me, he goes, man, you're supposed to hit balls like 50, 60 yards doing this.
Correct.
And that was an extenuation or an elaboration of what Ben Hogan showed in his book, where he just make halfway swings back and through with his elbows by
Right.
his sides.
Right.
Um, how about this connection like this? As once you get away from like lead arm parallel and your arms start to raise, if you're doing what you should, like you say with the X factor, those arms won't travel on by themselves, losing disconnection.
Correct.
Are you seeing where I'm going? Because so many golfers are like, well, I got to finish my swing. So they turn and their body stops. Then the arms keep running. And the next thing they're all tangled up and they can't get the club down.
Yeah,
Disconnect.
exactly right. Exactly right. And once again, the elbow will get behind the seam. The
Yeah.
arms have a lot of run off at the
Mhm.
top, and all of a sudden we do get a lot of disconnection. So, like you said, when you have that lower body that starts effectively first, it's going to buffer, and because of your natural flexibility, it's going to stop you from getting too far out of control with the arms. Now, mind you, if the rear elbow gets behind that seam of the shirt, it starts to fly a little bit, and all of a sudden we start to see a lot of the armpit. You're going to get in some trouble. But like you said, if you have reasonable control of your foundation and you have reasonable control over your arms and club, you shouldn't have that problem. I think if you get a lot of disconnection, a lot of runoff, and a poor X factor, a poor X factor stretch, I think you're in a lot of trouble, and that's where it becomes more difficult to reattach the elbow to the right side, a la Harvey Penick, you know, and things like that, and it makes the inside path to better golf, a la Peter Costas, a lot harder to maintain.
Yeah, I'll say this too, because, I'm sure now people will do this. They're like, well, I'm listening to Tom and to you, Mark, and it's all bluster because I'll show you videos of Shane Lowry, whose elbow like raises up and it's almost horizontal going back.
Certainly.
If you get that place where the elbows sort of separate a little bit, they get farther away from each other, that trail elbow lifts, you got to have some super good hands and some really neat timing, a la Lowry, to match
Oh
this
yeah.
thing up consistently well.
Well, let's take it while we're doing old school. Let's talk about Freddie Couples.
Yeah.
All of a sudden the elbow is out and away. Well, what did Freddie also possess? Unbelievable lower body action. We
Hmm.
had a lot of lateral slide. We had a lot of rotation, which drove that right elbow, which get that right elbow back, or that rear elbow into external rotation down in front of the rear hip, and all of a sudden off he goes, and he's playing pretty well. But there's always the great thing about golf is there's always outliers. And if you think everybody should swing the same way, it's really difficult because of the physiology that we have. And TPI has shown this, and Pro Screen has shown this, that there are people that can move in certain ways and they can do certain things, and there are people that can't. And I guarantee you that there's a reason why Freddie Couples and Lowry have the elbow in a different condition than, say, an Adam Scott or a Tiger Woods, and it would have to boil down to physiology. It's not that they're not any better any or they're any worse. It just means that they're put together a little bit different, and that's how they learn to get the club back there, and they learn to work around it in transition to make it very effective. And that's why there's unique golf swings. And that's what the wonderful thing about teaching this game for a living is that not everybody swings it the same way.
You're preaching, Reverend. I'm not so sure where to go because you've touched on so many things there, and I want to keep this going forward, but I want to camp here. Um, you talked about swinging in a barrel, or or the lateral slide. I think that's the coolest image ever of how the hips rotate inside of the barrel, but it also gets misunderstood. And then the lateral movement gets misunderstood too, because I've seen a lot of golfers in an effort to come from the inside. Now we're touching Costas, where instead of the hips going like laterally and almost away from the golf ball, the hips fire toward the ball. Now there's a new name for that called early extension, right? And everyone's like, well, you're early extending. Well, they're trying to move laterally because it's athletic, but they just don't understand how the hips should move. Now, you've done a bunch of research, so please tell us.
Yeah, so I think that if you just let's just boil it down into real simple thoughts.
Right?
You get to the top, all of a sudden, if you think about your hips, they're pointing into right field, they'll bump a little bit into right field. Now, they didn't bump a whole bunch into right field, but just a little bit into right field because if you go too far, you would get into that early extension that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But there's going to be a little bit of a bump, a couple inch bump, and that allows the right elbow and the rear shoulder to drop down a little bit. And
Harvey
then
Penick, right
yeah,
there.
and now once we're in the right position, now we use the rotation of our body to drive our rear shoulder forward. So it's almost that the downswing works, it's working 1/4 down and 3/4 out
Okay.
is as far as, and that goes back to something Homer Kelly had talked about, where he was talking about the rear shoulder, how it worked downward for a little bit and outward for a little bit. And I think that if you go back to, Penick and you go back to the inside move and you go back to the early extension and all the stuff that we're talking about now, it's just making sure that you have these motions in the correct sequence, but not, not out of control. Yes, you have too much bump into right field, you're going to early extend. You have too much spin, you're going to throw the rear shoulder out and over, and you're going to
Mm-hmm.
have trouble.
Yeah.
But a little bump, a little drop, a little rotation, life is pretty doggone good once you get that club in the right position. And I think that in lieu of working on this, I think people have taken this now that we're using the ground so much, we're into using the ground. I think they have taken, this motion, if let's talk about the lateral motion,
Yeah.
all of a sudden we've got to have good laterals and we've got to have good, powerful laterals. All of a sudden now that leads itself because everybody, can push themselves and drive themselves forward a lot easier than they can do a lot of other things. So I think that's where we've started kind of misunderstanding that. And it started to take a lot of that sequencing that we had before and it starts to make it, all of a sudden taking one aspirin, we're taking six or seven,
Yeah.
to cure that. And that's where we get too much lateral motion or we get too much rotary motion, you know.
I want to say this. I'll make a statement. I'll just let you respond. If all you have in your toolbox is a hammer, everything in the world will appear like a nail. And I sort of see that with a lot of golfers. Like they'll hear something sexy sounding, maybe on a podcast like this, or
Yep,
maybe on the internet somewhere or a YouTube video. And then the next thing, that's all they do. But this golf
exactly
swing is
right.
this wonderful blend of all these cool things you're talking about, and everything, must be taken in consideration in concert with everything else. And then everything is timed. You've used the word timing a few times. The timing of this all is a very big deal.
Right. And I think that probably one of the coolest technologies, out there is Swing Catalyst. And all of a
Yep.
sudden, you got Swing Catalyst, and you've got, Smart to Move, and there's there and Gasp has theirs, Force Plays. But they show you the timing of when all of a sudden, when do the hips move laterally? When do the hips start spinning? When do we use the verticals and the push up from the ground? And how do we sequence those effectively? And all of a sudden now you take the force plate data, you couple it with all of a sudden the AI data from a 3D motion analysis, whether it be gears, sports box, or motion to coach, and all of a sudden now we can start to put numbers and we can figure out how much you're twisting and turning, how many inches you need to move forward, how much you need to rotate, and you can go down all kind of paths. But the bottom line is it reiterates the fact that it's all about moderation and this dance routine that we have to have. You can go off on a tangent like Bryson and get as detailed as you want in today's with today's technology and learn this particular move. Or you can go and stand in a door frame and bump your lead hip against the door frame to feel what laterals are. You
Yeah.
can stand up here and pretend you're swinging a barrel field and figure out what rotary motion is. You can replant your left heel to figure out what the feeling of driving your weight down into the ground is, a la Nicholas. So I mean, I think that it's all there. It's just a matter of finding somebody that can sequence these in the in the right motion, create the right matchups. You hear that term all the time. We want the right matchups. And so we can control our pivot motion. And if we can't control our pivot, it's very difficult to control the arms. Now, I'm not saying that you can't use your arms to drive your pivot sometimes, but I'm more of the teacher that kind of believes if I can get the body working correctly, the arms will repair themselves to some degree. That doesn't mean I have to get in there. I can't get in there and fiddle with them a little bit, but I think that it certainly is something that we can that will right itself to some degree.
Well, in a way, if your body moves in the appropriate area and the appropriate amount, you almost guarantee that the arms can't go beyond a certain area. So you're defining the area in which they can move. So as a result, you're improving your chances of getting the club down consistently to the ball. Yes.
No question. And I think when we go back and we look at a book that McLean wrote, and he was talking about the eight-step swing, he was talking about the danger zones.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think that's what it was calling them as the danger zones. Yeah, the club, is delivered in a certain position. Let's just use belt high coming down. It's, the which so all of a sudden we've got the club in a certain position. Yeah, if the club head gets too far behind your hands and your body, you're in trouble. If it gets too far out in front of you, you're in trouble. But if you're somewhere in this little zone of moderation, you're going to hit it pretty decently.
Yeah.
And that's what I think. I think golf instructors nowadays have moved off on a tangent because of this technology, focusing in on trying to make everybody swing in ways physiologically that they might not be able to swing, and not taking some moderation. And I'm not here to call anybody out in that regard, but we've all seen videos of people contorting themselves into positions that you look at and you go, wow, that looks really, really difficult.
And you get
Uh,
injured as well.
with that, without a lot of flexibility. And I'm not saying that that can't work. I'm just saying it's harder. And if you teach a bunch of kids, you teach a bunch of college kids, you teach a bunch of mini tour players and professional players, they can do anything you ask them to do. But if you have Mrs. Haverkamp like I do on the lesson tee, and she's trying to get this thing airborne,
Yeah.
you know, I might need to keep things pretty well in that out of those danger zones and in that moderate zone where she or he can find that the arms or the body in a position where they can return it and get the club back to square reasonably.
Well, I'm expecting, and again, folks, Tom is this beautiful, he's a bridge between old and new, and we're showing how old and new actually are very much the same. The new just has numbers and data ascribed to it, of which Tom has done all the research. But I want to say this because I look at you here and you got this background where there's this pretty palm tree behind you. I'll say quintessentially old school because I'm old enough to have been there, where I've seen a really good golfer. I mean, a major champion struggling with launching direction, and a very savvy instructor took him to a place where there was a tree about 40 yards in front of him. And he said, all right, you're missing shots to the right. I need you to hit 20 shots to the left of this tree. How are you
Yep.
going to do that? And then what the decent or the good golfer, even the decent golfer in this situation, you'll organize all the stuff we're talking about to present the club face in a way to get the ball to launch around the left side of the tree. And if you're having that problem, around the right.
Right. And that's so brilliant. I'm so glad you brought that up. In my when we built the facility, when I lived in Mexico, I worked in Puerto Vallarta for 5 years for the Four Seasons Punta Mita.
That must have sucked.
Oh, it was, yeah, it was really terrible. Perfect weather all the time and beaches,
Uh,
and oh, it was great. Margaritas. I had them put a tree. I had a short game area, and I had them put a tree just to the right of that short game area, about 60, 70 yards off the tee.
mhm.
So that way I could do just that drill because I'm always big. And if you've taken a lesson from me, you'll hear this. Go back to being a kid again.
Yeah.
I'm a tree. Bend it around me. I'll stand out in front of them. I'm like, go, you're in the woods. How would you cook it around the tree? How would you cut it around the tree? All of a sudden, we get so bound up into TrackMan data and foresight data and all this stuff about, the face, the path, the gear effect and this and that. And while I'm the biggest techie in the world, and I absolutely love that stuff, thank God it wasn't around when I was a kid, or I would have never left the
Mhm.
practice range.
Yeah.
But going back, like you said, and just saying, hey, start this ball to the left of that tree. How'd you do it? Well, I wiggled my left ear. All right, well, you're a
Yeah.
left ear wiggler to start the club down. Congratulations. Work on that. Or I feel like I'm doing X, Y, or Z. That brings the feel and the old school back into it. I think what we've done, or what we have a danger of doing with this technology, is losing feel. And the bottom line is, if we lose feel, we can't play because we're not robots. We're not robotic. I didn't say you couldn't keep your downswing path within certain ranges and play pretty decently. But if you're trying to get your downswing path to 2 degrees out or 2 degrees in every single time, you're pushing a rope uphill. And you're
Mhm.
and you're really working in a way that's going to compromise your feel and make it very difficult for you to shape shots when you get in trouble and you've got to do something outside of the norm. We don't play golf in a dome, and it's a very, and the wind's going to blow and it's going to be wet. And so we're going to have trees and slopes and humps and bumps. So we got to be able to work around that.
It's amazing to me. It's fresh in my mind because this is in 2025 and I'm back from the Travelers Championship where Tommy Fleetwood came up just shy to Keegan Bradley. And Tommy, every day, even prior to a round of golf, tournament round, sets up a practice or warm-up station, practice station, whatever you want to call it, with an alignment rod, and then one stick stuck diagonally in the ground, essentially his swing plane, and he practices just over the top of that to make sure the club doesn't fall too far behind him. He does it
Exactly.
every single day.
Yeah. And,
And
and
it's not
because
like he's trying to hit the ball. He's just trying to feel, there's your thing,
there you
and not
go.
complicate the thing to a place where he's like, all right, this is my sweet spot for the day. So I've got something I can go and take to the course, as opposed to going, well, I'm turning my body and I'm ground reaction forcing like Tom said I should, but the ball's still going everywhere. Where Tommy's
Right.
like, this is my zone. This is where I got to feel my club move because he's got something he's practicing with.
100%. And I think that goes back to McLean's danger zones. He's just trying to keep him out of that danger zone because he knows when he doesn't play well, maybe the club gets sucked in behind him
Yep.
and he starts hitting flip hooks. I don't know Mr. Fleetwood's, but let's just say he starts hitting flip hooks. So all of a sudden putting that shaft out there and keeping the arms out in front, keeping it in front of that seam of the shirt, so to speak, and being able to create a better pivot or create a better arm structure coming down helps him to not get into those danger zones and to keep his swing in a very moderate place where he doesn't hit too many foul balls. I always tell people, I'm like, look, all we're trying to do is not hit foul balls.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If you are hitting a draw, then you need to make sure, as a right-handed player, then you need to make sure when you look up, that thing is curving right to left. If you're in a fade, it better be going left to right. We can't have a two-way miss. And when we start having those two-way misses, when we start having those swings fall into those traps and getting outside those moderate zones, that's when we start hitting foul balls. And when we hit foul balls, that's when we can't play. The big miss a la Hank Haney, and then you've got two-way misses. Everybody will preach against the two-way miss.
If I'm hearing a common denominator here, a lot of it is, the old school stuff is simple sounding. And and to Fleetwood, just to put a bow on that conversation, when he hits, he has his caddy Ian, just basically puts a club underneath Tommy's chin because it falls backwards when he hits,
Hmm.
practices above his station. So he tell you there's his feels that he goes out there with. All right, let's wrap with this. I've kept you away from your snorkeling and your diving and all these beach activities you got going on in your vacation. Thank you. Um, This is the ultimate in feel. And we live in an era of ground reaction force because the golf ball's going a ton and we're all trying to hit it harder. And so we're using the ground, right? And I'm watching golfers bounce all over the show and they're hitting foul balls all over the lot. But there was one very country wise old man named Sam Snead who, when the golf swing went awry, he would practice barefoot.
Exactly right.
I did so last night in my garage. Okay. And so when you sent this to me, I'm like, this is like a message from heaven for me. So please tell us about practicing or hitting balls barefoot.
I think it's all, about awareness and sensory awareness. And when you have shoes on and socks, you have eliminated some of your awareness as to how you're interacting with the ground. And the great thing about force plates nowadays is they can give us a uh, very accurate insight as to what you are doing. But what we lose is that feel of how we're doing it. You know, what are the toes doing? What's the ball of the foot doing? What's the heel doing? And all of a sudden, when you start to look at and hit balls barefooted, of all things, and Snead was brilliant with this. He figured out that he had to swing within his feet, so to speak. He couldn't get out to the
Rolling around, yeah.
outside of his feet. He couldn't get up on his toes. He couldn't get back on his heels. He had everything kind of that his CG, so to speak, or his pressure center of pressure was always in the right position or trending in the right position. It wasn't getting to the extremes. And so when you swing barefooted and you hit those easy little shots, I think you can find your feel. You can reattach your feel to something that you can look for that's more concrete when you start adding speed. And as we all know, if you start, I always tell people, I'm like, look, I can't teach you to run hurdles before you know how to walk. So if you're trying to create speed, and you're trying to create a lot of awareness on how to create speed, if I can slow you down and step you back and have you do that and create that right momentum or the right sequencing, whether it be barefooted or in shoes, in partial speed, then we can start to build that up and we can start to add some more speed to it and have some more fun. Because let's face it, everybody wants to hit it further. There's not a person on this planet, even if they hit it 350, that doesn't want to hit it 360.
Yeah. Truth be told, though, folks, some of the best pitching and bunker lessons I've given have been with a person barefoot. Okay, speaking of barefoot, I need to get you back to a place where your toes are in the sand there behind you. So, Tom, for the folks who want to know more, who want to follow you, etc., please tell them where they can go to get more on you.
Perfect. You can find me at Tom Stickney Golf on let's see, Instagram. I don't let's see, and then Facebook, Tom Stickney Golf. And then if you want to reach me via email, it's pretty easy. It's tomstickneygolf@gmail.com. I'm very easily found and very open to answering all the questions and attacking all the videos that I can from the listeners at home.
But right now, we're going to let him get back to one of his pastimes so he can enjoy his time off.
Thank you
Thank you
so
for
very
your
much.
time, your intellect, just
My
for
pleasure.
sharing the way you did, Tom. I really appreciate it because for me, it's all about understanding and all this information that's rampant. The understanding of it is important, and you've really done a great job helping us to do that.
Thank you so much. And I'm a big fan of your podcast. I'll continue to listen and I keep up the great work, sir.